You don't need a pattern to make a simple bucket hat. Today I want to teach you the designing steps so the next time you're at your local craft store and you see a yarn you like, you can make your own design. Try it in chenille or a novelty yarn, cotton and add some flowers to it, or keep it simple. The options are endless. The hook you choose will depend on whether you want a more flowy hat or one with more structure. But start by looking at the yarn label and what your yarn label recommends. This yarn, for example, recommends an H or 5mm crochet hook. But for tight stitches and a firm shape, I opted to use a 4mm hook with this worsted cotton yarn. For a hat with more drape, go with the recommended hook size on the yarn label. But for more tightness, I recommend going down 1 or even 2 full hook sizes. Now onto our yarns. I'm going to keep this super simple, so I won't talk about blends. If you want something for the summer, a cotton yarn would be a great choice as it is very breathable. It also holds its shape well and it's a natural fiber. Acrylic and polyester yarns are generally lower in cost because they are man-made. They won't be stiff like cotton and you can find all kinds of variety. Your novelty yarns will be man-made, so things like chenille or velvet yarns, for example. Wool will give you a warmer hat with less breathability than cotton, but will keep you warm. Depending on the type of wool, it can be itchy and they are expensive. The stitch you use will influence the structure of the hat. It can also be determined by how much time you want to invest into the project. With the single crochet, you will produce a fabric with smaller gaps, and if you use a smaller hook than the yarn label recommends, you will get a firmer shape as well. The single crochet, because of its short height, also allows you to get a more precise fit. The downside is it will take more time, especially if working with a thin yarn. The double crochet, on the other hand, will give you a more flowy structure and more breathability, especially if you use the hook size recommended on the yarn label. It will also be a lot faster to make. The downsides, however, are that you will have large gaps between the stitches, but of course this is only a downside if it's not the look you want. Additionally, it's harder to get a more precise fit because the double crochet is much higher than the single crochet. And lastly, the half double crochet is the halfway point between both the single and double crochet. As a reference, I much prefer making my bucket hats in single crochet and in the spiral, which we'll discuss in a bit. So I've made 2 hats, both using the chenille super bulky weight yarn from Michaels, and in this one that you can tell is a little bit more flowy, well, much more flowy, I made it using double crochet stitch, and this one was made using the single crochet stitch, and you can tell that this one is much more firm. If you were to feel it, you could instantly tell. This one has much more form to it, and this one is much more airy and just flowy. So it just depends on what you're looking for. I'll show you what it looks like on my head. I definitely don't feel like I have that type of head that looks great with bucket hats, but some people look great with a more loose fit. I prefer to have a tighter fit around my head, but I did want to show you what this looked like. Again, much more flowy. And the single crochet one is a lot tighter. Oh, definitely. Oh, I much prefer how this fits. And the rim is not as flowy, as you can tell. So I do prefer this look here. Okay, when it comes to deciding whether to make your hat in a crochet spiral or to join and create a seam, it really depends on the kind of stitch that you're using. So for this one, I crocheted in a spiral. But because I'm using a single crochet stitch, it's a lot easier to hide the end there from where the round ends, and even then it's still kind of noticeable. However, I do prefer to work in the single crochet stitch when I'm making my bucket hats, And I would much rather have this little noticeable part at the end than having a whole seam. But if I were working with a half double crochet or a double crochet, I definitely would not recommend working in the spiral, because that end is going to be very noticeable just because of the difference in height, right? So for this one, which I worked in double crochets, I did join at the end of each round. Now, some people prefer to count the chain as a stitch and join into the chain. Some people prefer not to count the chain and join instead into the first stitch that they made in the round. I prefer to just not count the chain as a stitch, and I'm not a huge fan of the seam. To me, it's much more noticeable. This is why I prefer to work my bucket hats in the single crochet stitch, but I did want to show you that so you know what you would like to choose as you start your bucket hat. I did want to show you what I mean by joining in the chain in case you're not familiar and you wish to make your hat like this rather than in the spiral. I start my magic circle as normal, but I'm going to make this bucket hat in a half double crochet, so I'm going to make an additional chain here at the start of the magic circle. Now I'll go ahead and make the remaining stitches that I need to put in my circle. If you do want to count the chain as a stitch, make sure you count it in the number of stitches you're making in the magic circle. If you're not counting it, then ignore it. Now that I've come to the end, since I am not counting my chain as a stitch, I'm going to make a slip stitch in the first stitch I made. So I'm going to skip this chain here. If I did want to join in the chain and count it as a stitch, I would have to slip stitch in the top chain. But since I'm not doing that, I'm going to slip stitch in this first stitch that I made. And again here, since I'm not counting my chain, I'm going to make my next stitch in this same spot. I've come back around at the end of round 2, and I'm not going to join in this chain here because I'm not counting it. So I'm going to slip stitch in this first stitch. You can increase by any number, but 6, 8, and 12 are the most common. Since we are creating a circle, the rounds will be very predictable. First, you'll start with 6 stitches in your magic circle. Then in the next round, you will increase in each stitch. Next, you'll single crochet 1 and increase, and you'll repeat that 6 times. You'll see a pattern start to form. Look at round 4. You're making 2 single crochet and an increase. Round 5, 3 single crochet and an increase. Round 6, 4 single crochet and an increase. And with each round, all that is changing is the number of single crochets you are making are getting bigger. And of course, since you're increasing by 6, each repeat in the parentheses is repeated 6 times. And this is how we get the stitch count. Each round increases by 6. If you want to make your circle with an increase of 8, the formula is the same. See how rounds 2 to 12 are identical in both increase options? All that changes is the number of times the repeats in the parentheses are repeated and the stitch count at the end of each round. Same goes for increasing by 12. The rounds are identical and all that changes are the number of repeats and the stitch count. Now, while the previous formulas I showed you make mathematical sense, if you follow them, you will end up with this. In this example, I used 6 as my starting round and as my increase in each following round. This has created a hexagon shape. This is because with each round, you are stacking your increases in the same spots, creating these pointed edges. In this example, I have 6 points and 6 sides, but if you worked with an 8 as an increase, you'd have 8 points and sides, And likewise, if you worked with 12, you'd have 12 points and sides. This will become glaringly obvious the more rounds you make. If this is something you want to avoid, I'm going to teach you how to do this. That way you can transform your hexagon into an actual circle like I've done here. We talked about the formula for increasing and how it is really the same for any increase amount, but we focused on 6, 8, and 12. Following this formula, though, started to create pronounced or obvious corners and sides. To fix that, we want to offset where our increases land so they don't stack on top of each other in each round. I will make these offsets in rounds 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12. But this can be done for endless amounts of rounds. You just have to make these offsets in rounds that have an even number of single crochet stitches, so it can be easily split and we can place half the single crochets at the start, make our increase, and then place the remainder at the end of the repeat. You could make the offsets in the uneven rounds, but I find working with the even rounds easier to remember. Also note that the repeats where we offset decrease by 1 since we are using one repeat and splitting it in the start and end of the round. This formula applies to any number you are increasing by and can be used by any stitch, whether it's the single crochet, the half double crochet, or the double crochet. Of course, what would change is the number of times the repeats are repeated. And I've listed out here how this formula would look if you're increasing by 6, 8, and 12. Let me give you an example so that makes more sense. Let's say I'm making a bucket hat in a single crochet stitch, and I'm going to start and increase by 6 single crochet stitches. Like we talked previously, our rounds, because we're making a circle, are going to be identical. The only thing that changes is how many times we're repeating the repeats. In this case, we're working with a 6 to increase in each round. Now, to avoid the hexagon shape, we want to find the rounds that have the even numbers. So, single crochet 2, single crochet 4, single crochet 6, single crochet 8, single crochet 10, etc. You can really split your stitches in any round to avoid the hexagon shape, but I find that it's a lot easier to stick to the rounds that you can evenly split in half. The first round that we want to change to avoid our hexagon shape is going to be the round single crochet 2 increase, because we can split that in half. So we're going to borrow one of the repeats and we're going to have just single crochet 2 increase 5 times. Now with this repeat that we borrowed, we're going to split it in half. We're going to just place single crochet 1 and then increase at the beginning of our round. Continue with our repeat 5 times, and then at the very end we'll place the remaining single crochet that we split in the beginning, and we'll place it at the end. Another example, let's say single crochet 10 increase. We can easily split that in half to make it 5. So we'll take the round and we'll place single crochet 5 at the beginning, make our increase, and then we'll continue with our repeat as normal. Only we'll be repeating it 5 times, not 6. Then the remaining single crochet 5 stitches we'll place at the end. And you can do this in any stitch with an even number, however many rounds you have to make the hat the size that you need for your head. By splitting our rounds, we can avoid our increases landing in the exact same place in each round. That way we avoid having this hexagon shape, which frankly doesn't look very good on your head, because I don't know about you, but I've never seen anybody with a hexagon shaped head. In this example, I'm using a super bulky chenille yarn and I'm working in single crochet. With this type of yarn, I know that when I'm working in single crochet, I cannot start with a 6 in the magic circle if I want it to lay flat. So I've made 8 single crochets in the magic circle, and as you can see, the circle lays flat. If, however, you worked in double crochet and you placed 8 in the magic circle, you would end up with this. See how it doesn't lay flat? This is because I am now working in double crochet rather than single crochet. You might be tempted to keep increasing and hope for the best, but as you can see, this is what I'm doing here, and after a few rounds, it's obvious that it's just not going to stay flat. To fix this, you need to place 12 double crochet stitches in your round. This part will require some trial and error if you run into this problem, but I can tell you that if you choose to work with a bulky or super bulky yarn, you should start with 8 stitches, and depending on the type of stitch you're using, you may have to start with 12. Now that you've figured out how to make the circle for the top of your head, you need to figure out measurements to know how many rounds to make. There are so many wonderful resources online that tell you the approximate head sizes for all kinds of ages, from infant to toddler to adult women and men. These resources are great, especially if you're making a bucket hat for someone else. As you can see here, I've made my circle with offset rounds so that I don't get a hexagon shape. In this example, I am working in single crochet and with 6 stitches. After several increased rounds, you can measure the diameter of your hat to see if you have the recommended size according to the charts online. The diameter is measured at the center from one side of the circle to the opposite side. You can, of course, always check it out on your own head, like I'm doing here, if it's for yourself. If you've checked the diameter and it looks good, you can now move on to the easiest part of the hat, which is the length of it. For this part, you're no longer going to increase, but rather create the length from the crown to the top of your ears. To do this, you will place only 1 stitch in each stitch around. And since I'm working in single crochet, I will make 1 single crochet in each stitch around, maintaining the stitch count of the last increase round. Take note of where you stopped increasing, as you will need to increase again for the brim of the hat. Okay guys, so I've gone ahead and made my single crochet rounds, and now my bucket hat is starting to look like this. The single crochet rounds has made it go downwards, okay? So if you look at the guide, you're going to measure from the top here, the crown, all the way to the bottom, and that will give you the measurements for where it will hit your ear, okay? If you're making this for yourself, the good thing is you can try it on your own head. So I'm going to show you how it looks on me. And mind you, this does look a little funny right now. So if you can see here, it touches my ear at this point, okay? So this is where you want to start your increase rounds again. And what you want to do is you want to go back to where you did your last increase round. So in this case, I went up to single crochet 13 increase. So now when I come down here to the next round, I'm going to make the single crochet 14 increase. But like we talked about, we don't want to have a hexagon shape, and you don't want that for the bottom as well. So instead of doing single crochet 14 increase for that first repeat, we're going to split 14 in half, and we're going to get single crochet 7. Then we'll increase, and then we'll continue with the repeat of single crochet 14 increase. And then at the end, we'll have the remaining 7 stitches that we split at the start of the repeat. And then continue with that until you're happy with how long it is. The other thing I did want to mention is, I know we talked about different yarn materials. This one, because it's 100% cotton, it's not going to have a lot of stretch to it. So once you start making the increases, before you start the single crochet rounds that will make it go down, place it on your head. Follow the guide for the measurements, of course, but also if it's for yourself, place it on your head and make sure it doesn't feel too tight, because you don't want to make all of this and then feel that it's way too tight on your head and have to frog all of this work that you've done, okay? I did want to mention that when you make the brim of the hat, you have 2 options. You can work into both loops, or you can work into the front loop only. If you work into the front loops only, you will have a more pronounced brim and it will be more wavy. I'll show you what I mean by that here. If you choose to work in both loops, you will do so like this, inserting your crochet hook in both loops. just like you've been doing this whole time. However, if you choose to work in the front loop only, you will do that like this. You'll only insert your loop in this front loop. Okay guys, so I continued making increased rounds to increase the rim of the hat. I actually ran out of yarn. If I had more, I might have made an extra round, but this is what it looks like. Still haven't weaved in that end there. But the nice thing about doing it in a solid color is you could make some flowers and just sew them on. I'll show you a picture that I saw online of a design that was like that. If you worked in a spiral, there will be a noticeable change between the start of the round and the end. If working in double crochet, you can make a couple stitches in half double crochet and a few more in single crochet to create a less obvious end. However, since I am working in single crochet, I'm going to make a slip stitch as there is nothing lower in height to a single crochet than a slip stitch. You can now pull your end. I will show you how to weave this end neatly. Insert your needle into the next stitch, under both loops, just like this. Pull tight. Now bring the needle through to the front of the previous stitch, coming under both loops. Pull tight again. You can now weave in the end to the back and you're finished making your bucket hat. As a little extra, I wanted to talk about ways that we can customize our hat, or a little brainstorming session, you could say. One thing you could do is make the hat in color blocks, making the top half one color and then the bottom half another. You could make 3, 4, or even more color blocks. You could also try and make a surface slip stitch, or several of them, around the hat. Of course, choose a different color from the hat to really make it stand out. Another option could be to try a color changing yarn so you don't have to worry about weaving in the ends. There's so many fun cake yarns that you could try. My personal favorite thing to do is to make applique that I can add to my hats. I added flowers to one of them that I showed you in the video. But there's so many YouTube videos that you can find with all kinds of applique. You could also try a novelty yarn. I made one of my hats in Lion Brand's Feels Like Bliss, and the end result doesn't even look like crochet. It can be hard to work with, but definitely worth the effort. My last suggestion would be to make some bear or cat ears and sew them on the top. However, there's so many unique combinations that you can try. If you end up making one, share it with me on Instagram. I'd love to see what you came up with. I hope that this video helped you, so next time you're at your local craft store and you see a yarn that really gets your imagination going, you can feel confident in making your own bucket hat. If the video helped you, please leave a like. Thanks for spending this time with me. Till next time!